What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the incredible folks at NerdTees, and welcome to week 5 of my weekly CFL football pick show for the 2019 CFL season. And if you're wondering what I'm doing in the thumbnail, it was my interpretive impression of the odds makers in Vegas. This week, it's just ridiculous. The odds are at least 2 days overdue. Look, that's obviously a cartoony reaction, but seriously, like Vegas, get your stuff together. So in this video, there are no current lines, but I'll just set some lines that I think the lines are going to be. They're obviously not going to be my official picks. My official against the spread and over-under picks will have to be in the description as well as the comments section below. Last week, we did kind of come back down to earth, as was eventually expected. It still wasn't a terrible week. Like, we went 5-7 overall, 2-2 straight up, 2-2 against the spread, and where we lost out on was the totals, which is relatively typical for me picking totals. Only went 1-3. We're still 10-5 straight up and 10-5 against the spread on the season. Those are both 67%. That's above where I wanted to be against the spread and just below where I want to be straight up. We're now under 500, however, on the totals this season at 7-8. That's only 47%. 27-18 overall in all of our picks so far on the season, which is right on that magical 60% line. Standings in the CFL, Hamilton, despite their loss last week, remains in first place in the East Division at 3-1. Worth noting that the REDBLACKS are now 2-1, still a full game behind. In the West, Winnipeg, still the class of the CFL, undefeated at 3-0, but Calgary is now 2-1, and look out, because they may have just woken up. In the official Atlantic Schooners CFL Fantasy Football League, I had a bad week. I had a bad week last week in week 4. I sit in 10th place right now out of 60 people in that league, and it just was not a strong week. I only brought in 50.8 fantasy points. Currently sitting at 391.6 points overall, which again, still good, still within the top 10. And we still obviously have a ton of ways to go in this CFL season. My Week 4 MVP, head and shoulders, was John White, running back for the BC Lions. 22 carries for 138 yards on the ground, found the end zone, also added 28 yards on 4 catches. That was 26.6 fantasy points for John White, and he was the only guy on my roster that had 10 or more points, and that includes my quarterback, Cody Fajardo. Yikes. Without further ado, we're going to take a look at my Week 5 lineup right now. So there's the lineup in front of you. Obviously, very Winnipeg Blue Bombers heavy. We're going to try to exploit that matchup against the Toronto Argonauts, head and shoulders the worst defense in the CFL right now. You're also going to notice I'm not playing a defense this week, and that was simply a matter of the financials. The defenses that I was interested in playing were way too expensive and were going to take away from other positions. I had some players I felt very, very strongly about playing this week, namely Andrew Harris and William Stanback, and I was basically going to do whatever I could do to play those two players. We're playing no defense this week. We're hoping for big numbers from that exploitable Winnipeg-Toronto matchup. There's my Week 5 fantasy roster. Our Week 5 schedule in the CFL looks a little something like this. The Edmonton Eskimos are traveling to BC to take on the Lions, Mike Riley's former team, now coming to his new team's barn. You got Toronto in Winnipeg taking on the Blue Bombers, that aforementioned matchup that we're trying to exploit for fantasy. You got the Montreal Alouettes traveling to Ottawa, fresh off the Owls' first win of the season, to take on the REDBLACKS, and the final game of the week, probably the game of the week, the Calgary Stampeders in Hamilton to take on the Ticats. Could that be a Grey Cup preview? We're going to start with Edmonton versus BC. The Eskimos coming off of their bye from last week, currently also sitting at 2-1, I guess tied for second in the West Division. They were losers last time out, dropping a 28-21 decision against Winnipeg. That was in Winnipeg back in Week 3. Trevor Harris throwing 54 times in that loss, 345 yards, but nobody could find the end zone. And when I say nobody could find the end zone, I mean nobody could find the end zone. You had Kenny Stafford as well as Collins, both of those guys going over 100 yards receiving. Greg Ellingson had 7 catches for 73 yards. Somebody score. Somebody find the end zone. Harris had 5 guys that caught at least 4 passes in that football game, but nobody had the finish. Nobody could get across that goal line and put points on the board. The only Eskimo who put points on the board was their kicker, Shaun White. A perfect 7 for 7 on his field goals in that game, which, good for Shaun White, but if your kicker's kicking 7 field goals, you probably haven't had the greatest game. They won time of possession. They had more total offense. Quite frankly, the Eskimos deserved better in that football game, despite the fact that they did take 13 penalties, almost 140 yards in penalties. That really stalled them out on a number of drives that probably should have been points on the board. The Eskies kind of gave that one away. The BC Lions picked up their first win of the season last week, a victory over the Toronto Argonauts. That game was in Toronto. They win that game 18-17, and as everyone predicted, they win it on a game-winning rouge off of a missed field goal. Ladies and gentlemen, what can John White do for you? What he did for the BC Lions was 26 touches, 166 all-purpose yards. He moved the ball better than any Toronto Argo on the opposite side, save obviously for the quarterback, but like any other skilled player on the Argos, John White was head and shoulders the better football player, and that was it. That was the difference right there. I also want to shout out Lamar Durant in that BC Lions receiving core, already having like a breakout season. He goes for 9 catches, a $125 and a touchdown in this game. So far on the season, 23 catches, 308 yards, and 4 touchdowns. The guy has already set a new career high in receiving touchdowns, and we're only 4 games into the season. So shout out to Lamar Durant, having himself a hell of a start to the year. I almost look at this game in a similar way that I looked at Ottawa's game last week. Last week, I looked at Ottawa, who were playing Winnipeg. I looked at them as, okay, this is a team that got lucky to win last week, and now they're playing against a team that can serve them lunch. And that's kind of how I feel about BC this week. I just kind of think they got lucky to win that football game, and now I think they face an opponent that is more than capable of putting a real beating on them, and I kind of feel like that's what's going to happen. I'm on the Eskimos in this football game. That Eskimos defense is still not getting the respect it probably deserves for what it's done so early in the season. That's the number 1 pass defense in the CFL right now. I'm on the Eskies in this game. I'm going to take Edmonton in BC to hang a loss on the BC Lions. Now, obviously, again, no lines, no totals, no nothing as of recording time. I put this as Edmonton about -4, something like that. I've got them as favorites of under a touchdown in this one on the road. Would have been a little bit higher. I actually originally thought this game was in Edmonton, so shout out to Millhouse for correcting me on that one. So if you get a number under a touchdown with Edmonton in favor, it would be tough for me to not take that. Of course, my official picks will be in the description as well as the comment section below. Obviously, no total. I kind of set this around a low to mid 50. So if you get like a 50, 51, 52, I might look at the over. If you're a mid to high 50, 56, 57, I probably have to consider the under on that. Let's go to Winnipeg now for the classic matchup of best in the West versus worst in the East. The Toronto Argos are in town. Argos 0-3 on the season, obviously losers of 3 straight, coming off that single-point loss, 17-18, against the Lions, where they lost on the Rouge at the end of the game. But it is worth pointing out that was as close as the Argos have come to looking like a professional football team in a CFL game this year. Folks, McLeod Bethel-Thompson might actually be the real deal here. And I know I'm like, once again, this is another one of those things where I'm like the last person on the bus for this one. But look, he might be the real deal. He went over 75% passing against a BC Lions defense that admittedly has not been very good this year, but is still capable of making some plays. Threw for 303 yards, threw a touchdown and a pick. It's no small feat to outduel Mike Riley in a football game, and McLeod Bethel-Thompson did that last week. So this guy might be the real deal, even if and when James Franklin might be ready to come back. I think this is MBT's team. James Wilder Jr. cashes in. He finds pay dirt for the first time in the CFL in 2019, his first touchdown of the year. He still only touched the ball 13 times and turned him into 109 all-purpose yards. I don't know how many times I have to keep saying this. James Wilder needs to be treated the same way Andrew Harris is treated in Winnipeg. Not saying he's as good, but he needs to be treated in the same way. If he's not touching the ball 20 times, The Argos are failing on offense. That's as simple as I can put it. Speaking of Andrew Harris and his Winnipeg Blue Bombers, 3-0 to start the season, obviously winners of 3 consecutive, coming off of a 2-possession win, 29-14 over the Ottawa REDBLACKS last week. Matt Nichols gets himself injured in this game, and again, it's worth noting, this is not the same situation as like a Zach Collaros hit by Simone Lawrence. This was Matt Nichols' fault, and he admitted as much in the post-game. He knows he should have started sliding sooner. And unfortunately, he got himself hurt. Looks like he's going to be okay to play, but that quarterback situation is very, very murky, which might make you question why I'm playing Chris Streveler as my fantasy quarterback this week. Well, I mean, look, if Nichols gets hurt again, Streveler's going to play the entirety of the game after that point. Streveler was less money against the cap. And Chris Streveler, as far as I'm concerned, is like the ultimate luxury in the CFL. The fact that he can move the football through the air and on the ground with such poise, he does not get flustered by big moments. He is clutch when the game calls for him to be clutch. He moves the ball. He's got a nose for putting points on the board. That is like the ultimate luxury in the CFL, to have your starting quarterback, but then to have the guy behind him be so versatile and so good at moving the ball and generating points on the offensive side. And in much the same way as I shouted out Lamar Durant when I was talking about the BC Lions, special shout out time to Blue Bombers special teamer fullback Mike Miller. Mike Miller from Riverview, New Brunswick. Always warms my heart to see Atlantic Canadians do well in the CFL. And Mike Miller had a game. 7 tackles on special teams, far and away the most of anybody in this game, and he even caught a little 3-yard dump pass that he turned into a 14-yard gain. Mike Miller had himself a hell of a game, Riverview, New Brunswick's own, shouting out a talented Atlantic Canadian player who had himself a heck of a game last week. Whether it's Matt Nichols or Chris Streveler, whether it's McLeod Bethel-Thompson or James Franklin or anybody else that the Argos want to throw out there at quarterback, the Argos cannot lace the Blue Bombers' cleats. I don't even think there's a debate about this if the game was in Toronto, much less with the game in Winnipeg. Blue Bombers roll in this one, absolutely. Taking Winnipeg to beat Toronto. My line that I set for this game is Winnipeg minus probably 12 or 13. So I think if you get anything under 2 touchdowns once the line actually comes out, I think you take them to cover that number. I don't see why you wouldn't. The total that I set for this game is another low to mid 50, just like the previous one. So once again, if you get a 50-51, might have to take the over. If you get a 56-57, might have to consider the under on that one, because that Bombers defense is good. And I'll take this opportunity, as I always do, to shout out the incredible folks at NerdTees, nerdtees.ca. Use that promo code BWFinest. Going to save you 15% at checkout. Free shipping on any order in Canada that goes over $75. If you're in the US, 2 clicks of a button, all of a sudden everything's in US dollars. Today's blend is a tasty and delicious Kiwilicious. Another one of those blends that is excellent, hot or cold, delicious on any kind of day. It is a perfect 21, 22 degree summer day outside. You could have this hot, you could have this cold, you could do whatever you want with this one. Nerdtees.ca, promo code BWFinest, save the 15%, get the free shipping on a big order. If you're in the US, get the conversion. Find yourself something to love, or find someone you love something to love. You can do it on nerdtees.ca. Let's go to Ottawa now, where the REDBLACKS are going to welcome in the Montreal Alouettes. The Alouettes picking up their first win of the season. Fantastic. And there's something about Montreal in the first 3-4 weeks of a season. I can't remember the exact year, but it's been years and years and years since Montreal has started a season 0-3. Montreal defeats the Hamilton Tiger Cats, who had just curb stomped them the week before, 36-29. The Alouettes win that game. It was the 2019 home opener for Montreal. You add in the fact that they obviously had revenge on their mind after getting embarrassed the week before. That equaled magic for the supreme underdog Alouettes. They pick up a hell of a win. I said this on Twitter shortly after I accidentally misspelled his name in a tweet. It is time to put some respect on William Stanbeck's name. Stanbeck is an elite, E-L-I-T-E, elite player in this league, and it's time to give him the respect that he absolutely deserves. He had 23 touches in this football game, turned him into 249 all-purpose yards. Stanback had over 200 yards rushing in this football game, found the end zone on the ground, not once, not twice, but thrice. Hat trick for William Stanback. And as far as I'm concerned, this was a total team win for the Alouettes. They had more yards, they had a better time of possession, nearly 35 minutes on offense with the football. They won on first down, they won on second down. The defense held on, and that's all that matters. The defense did just enough for them to win that football game. Montreal in the win column early in the season. The REDBLACKS, meanwhile, going in the opposite direction, now 2-1 on the season, having lost their game last week, that aforementioned 29-14 loss in Winnipeg against the Blue Bombers. And this was a prime instance for the REDBLACKS when the offense can't bail them out. Their defense right now is not winning football games. Yes, I understand that one of their touchdowns in this game was on, I believe, a fumble recovery that they took the other way. I get that, so they can make that one big play, but as a whole, that defense is not playing well enough. The offense certainly did not bail them out in this one, and Double D, Dominique Davis, absolutely cratered. After he had thrown for 71% and 630 yards in his first 2 games this year, he goes sub 60% in this one with his 5th and 6th interceptions of the year. Not going to be good enough against a class team like Winnipeg. But again, it all comes back to that REDBLACKS defense. They gave up over 450 yards of total offense. They gave up a touchdown in each and every quarter of that football game. They can't get them off the field. Winnipeg had the ball for 39 minutes on offense. They could not get a stop, could the REDBLACKS, to get them off the field. And the defense took 5 penalties, which kept some drives alive. Obviously, this is a much softer matchup for the REDBLACKS this week, but honestly, if the Owls play like they did in week 4, they're more than capable of winning this football game. I question, obviously, whether lightning strikes twice here, but again, if they pull out a performance like they did last week, you could see an Owls upset. Am I going to take an Owls upset? Unfortunately not. The Owls have to display to me that they're capable of winning games on the road against good opponents. And they're kind of like the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's like they kind of did, but then they kind of really didn't. So they've got to prove to me with any kind of consistency that they know how to win games on the road. I got to take Ottawa in this one. I've got the REDBLACKS at home picking up the win over the Alouettes. But I only have Ottawa as about a 3-point favorite maybe in this football game. 3, 4, maybe 5. I get the feeling we're going to see a big number here, especially where the game is in Ottawa. You're really going to want to hedge your bets on this one because especially if it's anything more than a touchdown, I think Montreal covers that. I think this game is going to be a lot closer than most people expect it to be. I also expect the game to be very high scoring. I capped this at a high 50, maybe even a low 60. So almost whatever number you get on the total, you're going to want to consider taking the over. It's 2 suspect defenses and a couple of offenses that we know are capable of putting up points. And the last game we're going to look at here is the game of the week, the Calgary Stampeders traveling to Hamilton to take on a suddenly injury-riddled Ticats team. But Calgary, winners of 2 games in a row now after losing their season opener. They're 2-1, and they look like they've turned the corner. No Mitchell, no problem. Nick Arbunkel with a hyper efficient football game, throws for over 86%, and the defense absolutely dictates that game. That game being a 37-10 win in Saskatchewan over the Roughriders, absolutely silencing Mosaic Stadium. Calgary's defense generating 3 interceptions as part of the 6 total turnovers that they were able to force in that game, to go along with 5 quarterback sacks on the combination of Cody Fajardo and Isaac Harker, because eventually Isaac Harker did come in. And again, the Stamps defense was so good that they did not allow either Cody Fajardo nor Isaac Harker to pass for more than 100 yards. This was easily the Stampeders' most complete game of the 2019 season, and it's hard not to look at that as, you know, and I told you so. It's hard not to look at that as payback for all of those, myself included, that were kind of doubting them early in the season. The Ticats dropping their first game of the year last week. They move now down to 3-1 on the season. That aforementioned 1 possession, 36-29 loss against Montreal that basically nobody saw coming. And the Ticats fell asleep in that football game. Like, they had a 5-point lead at the half. The Ticats allowed 23 points in the second half. Obviously, that 5-point lead at halftime absolutely disappears, and they really just coughed that one up. I think that cough up was due in no small part to the fact that they did lose Sean Thomas Erlington, my boy, Sean Thomas Erlington. He goes to the 6-game injured list with an injury early in that football game. I guess it's the combination of Anthony Coombs and Malik Irons. It'll be interesting to see how that exactly plays out. Because, I mean, Anthony Coombs is a wide receiver, but he carried the backfield after Sean Thomas Erlington got hurt in that game. And this Ticats team is so interesting to watch because it seems like every single week they have a new 100-yard receiving threat. And last week's game, it was Jalen Acklin, 8 catches for 120 yards. He found the end zone. I think that speaks to how good Jeremiah Masoli is. It's like every single week, it seems like there's another guy that's a threat to go over 100 yards. Calgary did do a really great thing going into Mosaic Stadium last week, hanging that loss on the Roughriders. Now they're on the road again this week. And you know what they say about teams trying to win back-to-back road games. It's definitely a thing in the NFL. It's a measurable thing in the NFL. Teams that were attempting to win back-to-back road games last season, the teams were 2-4 straight up in the second half of that back-to-back roadie. So only twice in 6 chances did a team actually win back-to-back games on the road last year. Despite the Sean Thomas Erlington injury and despite the defensive brain fart against an opponent that, let's be fair, I don't really think they took seriously, this is not an opponent that Hamilton will take lightly. This is arguably still the class of the CFL. I am going to take the Ticats here. I'm going to put respect on Jeremiah Masoli's name. I'm going to put respect on the Ticats name. And I just think Hamilton wins this game. You're talking about now with, Nick Arbuckle. Again, he was tremendously impressive in that game, but now he's going to go in and attempt to win back-to-back road games, a very difficult thing to do. I think there's just a number of things kind of leaning against Calgary in this game, and I just think Hamilton kind of sneaks up on them. I full well expect Hamilton will be an underdog in this game, because I think now everybody's going to look at Calgary like, okay, they figured it out, hammer Calgary's lines. I've got Hamilton as a 2-point favorite, but I don't think Vegas will have them as a favorite. So obviously, since I like Hamilton to win, I'm going to love taking Hamilton with the points. And as far as the total's concerned, I cap this thing somewhere around a mid-50. So I expect to see a number probably like 51 or 50 or maybe 52. Really make the choice difficult here. I might have to skew on the under there because I think this is 2 teams that can definitely play some defense. Okay, folks, there you have it. Those are the Week 5 picks. We'll go over them here with you one more time, and we'll just go over the straight-up picks because we don't have anything else. So I've got Edmonton going into BC and beating the Lions. I've got Winnipeg holding home field and beating the Toronto Argos. Surprise, surprise. I've got Ottawa holding home field and beating Montreal, but pay attention to that spread because if it's a big number, you might want to hedge and take the Owls against the spread. And I've got Hamilton at home upsetting the Calgary Stampeders. That's it for me. Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the incredible folks at Nerd Tees. Week 5 picks are in the books. I hope you enjoy the games this weekend and keep your eyes peeled in the next couple of weeks. I got something special coming.